In the dimly lit security room of Western Memorial Hospital, Detective Rachel Anderson sat alone, her eyes fixed on the grainy footage playing on the monitor. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, but she couldn't tear herself away from what she was watching. The video showed a shadowy figure moving through the pediatric ward at 2 a.m., silent and purposeful. Rachel had received the call earlier that evening. The hospital staff reported strange occurrences in the children's ward. Nothing stolen, nothing damaged, but something wasn't right. As she watched the footage for the 10th time, her coffee grew cold beside her, forgotten. The figure on the screen moved with a distinctive walk that made Rachel's chest tighten. She knew that walk. She had grown up watching it, teasing its owner about it. It was the same slight limp, the same way of favoring the right leg, a reminder of the time her brother Daniel had fallen from their treehouse when he was 10. But it couldn't be Daniel. He had vanished 15 years ago, leaving behind nothing but an empty bed in their foster home and a note saying, "I'm sorry." Rachel had been 17 then, and the loss of her 12-year-old brother had shaped every decision she'd made since. She leaned forward, adjusting the video quality settings. The figure wore dark clothes and kept their head down, but there was something about the way they moved that seemed both familiar and impossible. Rachel's hands trembled as she rewound the footage again. The security cameras tracked the figure's path through the hospital. They entered through a side door, using what looked like an employee keycard. The timestamp showed 1:47 a.m. The figure walked purposefully, as if they knew exactly where they were going. Rachel pulled out her notebook, documenting each detail. The figure visited 6 rooms in the pediatric ward, spending exactly 3 minutes in each. They never looked up at the cameras, never revealed their face. But that walk, Rachel would know it anywhere. Her mind drifted back to their childhood. After their parents' accident, she and Daniel had stuck together through 5 different foster homes. She had always protected him, made sure he had enough to eat, helped him with homework. Until that rainy night when he disappeared. The security footage showed the figure leaving the last room at 2:31 a.m. As they passed under a bright ceiling light, something caught Rachel's attention. She paused the video, zooming in as much as the resolution would allow. There, on the figure's right hand, a small circular scar. Daniel had the same scar, from an accident with a hot pan when he was trying to cook breakfast. Rachel's heart pounded. She had interviewed hundreds of witnesses over her career, solved dozens of cases, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. The brother she had searched for, the reason she had become a detective, might have just walked through this hospital. She checked the visitor logs, staff records, and maintenance schedules. Nothing matched. The keycard used to enter the building belonged to a Dr. Thomas, who insisted he had his card with him all night. The children in the rooms the figure visited showed no signs of disturbance. In fact, the night nurses reported that some of them seemed to be doing better than expected. Rachel pulled up the hospital's older security footage. Similar incidents had occurred every few months, always at night, always in the pediatric ward. She had been called in because this was the 4th such incident in the past year. She gathered her things, knowing she needed to interview the night staff again. But before leaving the security room, she made a copy of the footage. There was something about this case that felt different. Professional distance was important in her line of work, but this time, it felt personal. Walking through the pediatric ward, Rachel stopped at each room the figure had visited. The children were sleeping peacefully. In one room, a young boy who had been critically ill yesterday was now breathing easily, his fever gone. The nurses called it a miracle. Rachel thought about Daniel, about the kind heart he had always had. Even as a child, he would bring home injured birds and stray cats, trying to help them. The last time she saw him, he had been reading medical books way beyond his age level, fascinated by the idea of healing people. Outside, the early morning air was crisp. Rachel sat in her car, staring at the hospital building. If this was really Daniel, why was he here? Why now? And why hadn't he aged in the security footage? He should be 27 now, but the figure moved with the lightness of a teenager. She started her car, mind racing with possibilities. In her 15 years on the force, she had learned that sometimes the simplest explanation wasn't the right one. Something strange was happening at Western Memorial Hospital, and her brother, or someone who moved exactly like him, was at the center of it. Rachel pulled out her phone and dialed her partner's number. "Hey, Mark, I need you to look into something. Check other hospitals in the state for similar incidents. Look for unauthorized access to pediatric wards, especially around 2 a.m. And Mark, keep this quiet for now." As she drove home in the growing dawn, Rachel knew sleep wouldn't come easily. The image of that familiar walk, that distinctive limp, played over and over in her mind. Somewhere out there, her brother might be alive. And whatever he was doing in that hospital, she was going to find out. She glanced at the old photo she kept in her wallet, her and Daniel at their last foster home, his arm around her shoulders, both smiling despite everything. "Where are you, little brother?" she whispered. "And what have you been doing all these years?" The sun rose over the city as Rachel made a promise to herself. This time, she wouldn't lose him again. Whatever it took, she would solve this mystery. Because if there was one thing Detective Rachel Anderson was good at, it was finding people who didn't want to be found. Thunder cracked outside as Rachel sat at her desk in the precinct, old case files spread before her. The storm reminded her too much of that night 15 years ago, the night that changed everything. Her fingers traced the edges of a worn photograph, showing a young boy with bright eyes and untamed brown hair. The rain had been relentless that night, just like today. Rachel remembered lying in her bed at the Mortons' foster home, listening to the wind howl against the windows. She had checked on Daniel before going to bed, like always. He had been reading one of his medical books, the ones he borrowed from the library. "Just one more chapter," he had said, giving her that grin that always got him his way. She had ruffled his hair and told him not to stay up too late. That was the last time she saw him. When she woke the next morning to find his bed empty, her world stopped. The note on his pillow said only, "I'm sorry," in his messy handwriting. His backpack was gone, along with some clothes and his favorite books. The police searched, but the rain had washed away any traces. Now, sitting at her detective's desk, Rachel pulled up the new hospital security footage on her computer. The figure moved through the halls with that same limp she remembered. The result of Daniel jumping from the treehouse to save a baby bird that had fallen from its nest. Her phone buzzed. It was Mark, her partner. "Rachel, you need to see this. I found similar incidents at 5 other hospitals in the state. Always the pediatric ward, always around 2 a.m. And get this, in every case, critically ill children showed sudden improvement the next day." Rachel's hands trembled as she opened the files Mark sent. She had become a detective to find missing children, hoping each case would somehow lead her to Daniel. But this was something different. The reports showed children with terminal illnesses suddenly recovering, doctors baffled by their improvement. She remembered how Daniel used to talk about becoming a doctor. "I want to help people, Ratch," he would say, his face serious beyond his years. "I want to make sick people better." He had started reading medical textbooks after their 3rd foster home, where he had befriended a girl with leukemia. The precinct was quiet this late at night, most detectives having gone home. Rachel pulled up the hospital's patient records from the night of the incident. Each child the figure had visited had been seriously ill. One had stage 4 cancer, another was waiting for a heart transplant. By morning, their conditions had improved dramatically. Her mind wandered back to the days after Daniel disappeared. She had searched everywhere: homeless shelters, bus stations, libraries. Because Daniel loved books, she had put up posters, talked to everyone who might have seen him. The police eventually closed the case, but she never stopped looking. That's why she joined the police academy after college. Every missing persons case she worked on felt like a chance to find him. She became known for never giving up, for finding children others had given up on. But she never found the one child she wanted to find most. Rachel opened her bottom drawer, pulling out Daniel's case file. She knew every detail by heart. What he was wearing, blue pajamas with rockets on them. What he took, his backpack, 3 medical books, his favorite sweater, where the last confirmed sighting was a gas station 2 miles from the foster home. The security footage from the hospital played on her screen. The figure moved with such purpose, such certainty. How do they get the key card? How do they know which rooms to visit? And most importantly, why did children get better after these visits? She picked up her phone again. Mark, can you check something else for me? Look for any mentions of miraculous recoveries in pediatric wards across the country. Go back 15 years. While she waited, Rachel studied the photograph again. Daniel had been small for his age, but his eyes held a wisdom that sometimes unnerved people. He had always been different, more serious, more determined than other kids. After their parents died, he had become even more focused on helping others. Mark called back 20 minutes later. Rachel, you're not going to believe this. I found reports going back 14 years. Dozens of hospitals, all across the country. Same pattern. Mysterious visitor, sick kids getting better. The earliest report is from a small hospital in Oregon, just 3 months after Daniel disappeared. Rachel's heart raced. She had always known Daniel was special, but this was impossible. People don't just appear in hospitals and heal sick children, and they definitely don't stay looking 12 years old for 15 years. She gathered her files, knowing sleep wouldn't come tonight. The storm outside had grown stronger, lightning illuminating the empty office. On her way out, she passed the wall of missing children, faces of the ones they were still looking for. Daniel's picture wasn't there anymore. It had been moved to cold cases years ago. In her car, Rachel sat watching the rain, just like she had done countless nights after Daniel disappeared. But this time was different. This time, she had a lead, even if it made no sense. Her brother was out there, somehow helping sick children, somehow still young. What happened to you, Daniel? She whispered to the rain. What made you leave that night? And how are you doing this? She started her car, knowing she had a long night ahead. The mystery of the hospital visitor was strange enough, but combined with her brother's disappearance, it felt like something out of a dream. But Rachel Anderson had built her career on solving impossible cases, and she wasn't about to stop now, especially not when the case might finally lead her to her little brother. The fluorescent lights of Thompson's Family Market hummed quietly as tension filled the air. Officer Miller's grip remained firm on Ashley's arm, the young girl's eyes wide with a mix of fear and indignation. The scene had drawn the attention of several customers who stood frozen in the aisles, watching the confrontation unfold. I saw you slip something into your bag, Officer Miller insisted, his voice carrying through the store. Empty your pockets now. Ashley's hands shook as she tried to reach for her receipt. Sir, I paid for everything. Please, just let me show you. The sound of a door opening at the back of the store cut through the tense atmosphere. Heavy footsteps approached, measured and deliberate. What's going on here? The deep voice commanded attention, making everyone turn. Dr. Michael Williams stood there in his crisp white shirt and tie, his hospital ID still hanging around his neck. His presence filled the space, dignified and composed despite the anger flickering in his eyes. Emily Thompson, behind the counter, felt her stomach drop. She knew what was coming. Dad. Ashley's voice cracked with relief. Officer Miller's expression shifted from authoritative to confused. He looked between Ashley and Dr. Williams, his grip on the girl's arm loosening slightly. Your father? Yes, and I'm also the owner of this establishment, Dr. Williams stated calmly, though his jaw was tight. Would you care to explain why you're manhandling my daughter? The color drained from Officer Miller's face. Emily watched as realization dawned in his eyes. She wanted to speak up, to explain that her father had sold the store to Dr. Williams 3 months ago, that Officer Miller was new to the area and couldn't have known. But the words stuck in her throat. Dr. Williams stepped closer, his presence commanding respect. "Ashley, are you all right?" His voice softened when addressing his daughter. "I'm fine, Dad. I was just trying to show him my receipt," Ashley said, finally able to pull the crumpled paper from her pocket. The store had fallen completely silent. Even the usual beeping of the checkout scanners seemed muted. Customers watched the scene unfold, some with phones discreetly recording, others with expressions of uncomfortable recognition. "Officer Miller," Dr. Williams continued, his tone measured, "I've been watching you follow my daughter around the store for the past 10 minutes on the security cameras in my office. Would you like to explain what prompted such attention?" Officer Miller released Ashley's arm entirely, his training warring with his embarrassment. "Sir, I receive reports of shoplifting in this area. And when you saw a young black girl shopping alone, you assumed she was stealing," Dr. Williams finished for him. "Despite the fact that she's wearing her private school uniform and carrying a receipt for her purchases." Emily found her voice at last. "Dr. Williams, I can verify Ashley paid for everything. I rang her up myself just a few minutes ago." The tension in the air shifted. Officer Miller's face reddened as he realized the full extent of his mistake. He wasn't just dealing with a teenager he'd wrongly accused. He was facing a prominent doctor, a business owner, and a father protecting his child. "I must have been informed incorrectly." Officer Miller attempted to backtrack. "I apologize for the misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Dr. Williams raised an eyebrow. "Is that what we're calling racial profiling now?" The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Several customers nodded in agreement, while others shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, can we just go?" Ashley asked quietly, clutching her shopping bag closer. Dr. Williams placed a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder, but kept his eyes on Officer Miller. "No, sweetheart. This is a teachable moment." He turned to address the officer directly. "I would like your badge number and your supervisor's contact information. We'll be filing a formal complaint." Officer Miller reached for his notepad, his hands not quite steady. Emily watched as he wrote down the information, knowing this incident would have repercussions far beyond this moment. "I truly am sorry," Officer Miller said, handing over the information. His voice had lost its earlier authority, replaced by genuine regret. "I know you are," Dr. Williams replied. "But being sorry isn't enough. This happens too often to too many young people who don't have parents who own the store, who don't have the protection of social status or education." He turned to the watching customers, his voice carrying clearly. "This store has been part of this community for decades. The Thompson family built it on values of trust and respect. When I bought it 3 months ago, I promised to maintain those values. That means everyone who walks through these doors deserves to be treated with dignity." Emily felt tears prick at her eyes, remembering her father saying similar words countless times over the years. The store had always been more than just a business. It was a community cornerstone. "Officer Miller," Dr. Williams continued, "I expect you to take this experience and learn from it. The next time you're tempted to follow a young person around a store based on nothing but their appearance, remember this moment." Ashley stood straighter beside her father, her initial fear replaced by quiet pride. The customers began to disperse, but the impact of what they'd witnessed lingered in the air. Dr. Williams turned to his daughter, his stern expression softening. "Now, did you get everything on your mother's list?" "Yes, Dad." Ashley managed a small smile. "Even the special tea she likes." As they walked toward the exit, Dr. Williams stopped and looked back at Officer Miller, who stood rooted to the spot. "Officer, I expect to see you at our next Community Relations Board meeting. We'll be discussing how to prevent incidents like this in the future." The automatic doors slid open, and father and daughter stepped out into the evening air, leaving behind a store full of people forever changed by what they'd witnessed. Emily watched them go, knowing that tomorrow, this story would spread through their small town, forcing necessary conversations about bias, respect, and the true meaning of community. The store's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Officer Miller's face as he held Ashley's wrists behind her back. The metal handcuffs felt cold against her skin, and tears welled in her eyes as other customers stared. The routine shopping trip had turned into a nightmare in mere minutes. Emily watched from behind the counter, her hands trembling as she held Ashley's receipt. She wanted to speak up, to show the proof of purchase, but Officer Miller had already made up his mind. The accusations of shoplifting rang through the quiet store. The click of dress shoes against the linoleum floor drew everyone's attention. Dr. Michael Williams walked with the confident stride of someone used to commanding operating rooms and hospital boards. His blue surgical scrubs were still visible under his white coat, and his hospital ID badge swung with each step. "Officer," Dr. Williams's voice was calm but carried an undercurrent of steel. "That's my daughter you're attempting to arrest. And this is my store. Would you care to explain what's happening here?" The change in Officer Miller's demeanor was instant. The color drained from his face as his eyes darted between the professional-looking man before him and the young girl he had in handcuffs. His grip on Ashley loosened slightly. "Sir, there have been reports of shoplifting in the area," Officer Miller stammered, his earlier authority crumbling. "I observed suspicious behavior and—" "Suspicious behavior?" Dr. Williams raised an eyebrow, his calm demeanor making the officer's discomfort more apparent. "Please, elaborate on what you found suspicious about my daughter purchasing groceries after her debate team practice." Ashley stood straighter despite the handcuffs, drawing strength from her father's presence. Her school uniform, blazer and plaid skirt from the prestigious Riverside Academy, suddenly seemed to stand out more clearly under the store lights. Emily finally found her voice. "Dr. Williams, I can show you the receipt. Ashley paid for everything just 10 minutes ago." She held up the paper, her hand still shaking slightly. Dr. Williams nodded acknowledgement, but kept his eyes fixed on Officer Miller. "Officer, I'd just finished a 12-hour shift saving lives at Memorial Hospital. I stopped by my store to pick up some files, only to find you handcuffing my 16-year-old daughter. I'm curious about your probable cause." The other customers had formed a loose circle around the scene. Some had phones out, recording the interaction. Officer Miller noticed this, and sweat began to bead on his forehead. "There must be some mistake," Officer Miller said, fumbling with his keys to remove the handcuffs. "I wasn't aware that you were the owner, or that she was your daughter. And that makes a difference." Dr. Williams's voice took on an edge of steel. "Would this situation be more acceptable if she weren't my daughter? If I weren't a doctor? If I didn't own this store?" The handcuffs clicked open, and Ashley quickly moved to her father's side, rubbing her wrists. Dr. Williams placed a protective hand on her shoulder, but maintained his professional composure. "Dad, my debate notes are in my bag," Ashley said quietly. "He wouldn't let me show him." Dr. Williams reached for the shopping bag that had been placed on the counter. He pulled out a folder labeled Riverside Academy Debate Team, along with the groceries, milk, bread, and his wife's favorite tea. "Officer Miller," Dr. Williams continued, "I'm going to make a call to your supervisor. Then we're going to have a conversation about proper police procedure and the importance of probable cause." Officer Miller's radio crackled, breaking the tense silence. He reached for it automatically but stopped when Dr. Williams held up a hand. "Before you report this incident, I'd like you to think carefully about what you'll say. Will you mention that you handcuffed an honor student in her school uniform? That you didn't check her receipt? That you didn't ask any store employees about a potential theft?" The questions hung in the air, each one making Officer Miller's posture sink further. The watching customers murmured among themselves, many nodding in agreement with Dr. Williams's words. Emily stepped out from behind the counter, still holding the receipt. "Officer Miller is new to the area," she offered quietly. "He probably didn't know about the ownership change when my father sold the store to Dr. Williams." "That's no excuse for poor police work," Dr. Williams replied, though his tone softened slightly. "Ownership of this store shouldn't matter. What matters is that an officer of the law made assumptions and acted without evidence. Ashley had composed herself, standing tall next to her father. "Dad, can we still get Mom's tea home before it gets cold?" She was really looking forward to it. Dr. Williams squeezed his daughter's shoulder gently before turning back to Officer Miller. "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., my office. We're going to discuss how to prevent incidents like this in the future. And officer, bring your supervisor." The authority in his voice made it clear this wasn't a request. Officer Miller nodded, his earlier confidence completely deflated. He backed away slowly, then turned and walked quickly toward the store exit. As the automatic doors closed behind the officer, the tension in the store began to dissipate. Customers returned to their shopping, though many stopped to offer words of support to Ashley and Dr. Williams. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Dr. Williams asked his daughter quietly, examining her wrists for any marks from the handcuffs. Ashley nodded, managing a small smile. "I'm okay, Dad. I kept thinking about what you always say. Stay calm and know your rights." Dr. Williams pulled her into a quick hug before turning to Emily. "Thank you for trying to speak up. Your father would be proud of how you're helping run this store." Emily smiled, remembering how her father had taught her that running a store was about more than just selling groceries. It was about building community and standing up for what's right. As Dr. Williams and Ashley gathered their bags to leave, the evening light streaming through the store windows seemed to carry a different quality. Something had shifted in the air, a reminder that sometimes the tables turn in unexpected ways, and justice can wear many faces, including that of a tired doctor in surgical scrubs, standing up for his daughter in a grocery store. The abandoned church's stained glass windows cast colored shadows across the dusty floor as Rachel faced her brother. Daniel stood in a shaft of moonlight, looking exactly as he had 15 years ago. Still 12 years old, still wearing that determined expression she remembered so well. "I had to find out the truth," Rachel said softly, her voice echoing in the empty church. "All these years, all those hospitals, it was really you, wasn't it?" Daniel nodded, his young face carrying a weight that no child should bear. He sat down on one of the old wooden pews, patting the space beside him. Rachel joined him, trying to reconcile the boy before her with the 15 years that had passed. "That night I left," Daniel began, his voice unchanged from her memories. "I met someone, or something. I still don't know exactly what it was. It appeared in our backyard while I was watching the storm." Rachel listened intently as Daniel described a figure made of light that had spoken to him about pain and healing, about choices and consequences. The entity had offered him a deal, the power to heal sick children, but at a price that would change his life forever. "It showed me all the children who were suffering," Daniel continued, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "Kids with cancer, heart problems, rare diseases. I saw their pain, felt their fear. And then it asked me if I would give up my future to save them." "What do you mean, give up your future?" Rachel asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Daniel looked down at his small hands. "I stopped aging that night. I'll always be 12 years old. I can heal 100 children each year, but I can never grow up, never have a normal life. I'll watch everyone I love grow old and die while I stay the same." The truth hit Rachel like a physical blow. Her little brother had made an impossible choice at 12 years old, a choice to help others at the cost of his own life's natural progression. "The entity said there had to be balance," Daniel explained. "The power to heal comes with a price. My eternal youth pays for their second chances. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice, but then I see a child open their eyes after months of illness, see their parents crying with joy." Rachel reached for her brother's hand, noting how small it felt in hers. She thought of all the security footage she'd watched, all the miraculous recoveries she'd investigated. "How do you choose which children to heal?" "I can sense them," Daniel said. "When I'm near a hospital, I can feel who needs help the most. But I can only heal 100 each year. That's part of the deal. If I try to heal more, the power doesn't work." The moonlight shifted through the windows as clouds passed overhead. Daniel looked up at the colored glass, his face showing years of wisdom despite his unchanged appearance. "The hardest part isn't staying young," he admitted. "It's the loneliness. I can't stay in one place too long, can't make friends, can't let anyone get close. People would notice I don't age." Rachel felt tears forming in her eyes. "You could have told me. All these years, I've been searching for you." "I wanted to," Daniel's voice cracked slightly. "But I was afraid you'd try to stop me, or that knowing would hurt you more than not knowing. And I had to keep moving to reach as many children as possible." He stood up, walking to the altar where moonlight pooled on the floor. "I visit Mom and Dad's graves sometimes when no one's around. I leave flowers. I've watched you from a distance too, seen you become a detective, seen how you never gave up looking for me." Rachel joined him at the altar, kneeling down to be at his eye level. "You don't have to be alone anymore. We can figure something out." Daniel shook his head, a sad smile on his face. "I can't stay, Rachel. There are children who need help, and I'm the only one who can give it to them. But," he hesitated, "maybe we could meet sometimes, like this, in empty places where no one will see us." The weight of his sacrifice hung heavy in the air between them. Rachel thought about all the birthdays he'd never have, all the experiences he'd never know. Yet here he was, still thinking of others first. "Look at this," Daniel said, pulling a small notebook from his pocket. Inside were hundreds of names, dates, and hospitals. "These are all the children I'd helped. When it gets hard, when the loneliness feels too heavy, I read their names and remember why I chose this." Rachel took the notebook, carefully turning its pages. Each name represented a life saved, a family spared from grief. Her brother's handwriting filled page after page, a record of miracles performed by a boy who would never grow up. "The entity visits me sometimes," Daniel said quietly. "It asks if I want to give up the power, grow up normally. But I always say no. How could I live a normal life knowing I could have saved these children, but chose not to?" The first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, signaling their time was growing short. Daniel looked toward the door, his face showing the familiar determination Rachel remembered from their childhood. "I have to go," he said. "There's a hospital in the next town with 3 children who need help. But now that you know, maybe we can meet again." Rachel pulled him into a tight hug, remembering all the times she dreamed of finding him. "Promise me," she whispered. "Promise me you'll let me be part of your life again, even if it's just meetings in empty churches." Daniel hugged her back, his small frame carrying the strength of his conviction. "I promise. And Rachel, thank you for never stopping looking for me." As he walked toward the door, his figure silhouetted against the rising sun, Rachel watched her eternal 12-year-old brother, a healer of children, a maker of miracles, forever young, but carrying the wisdom of ages in his heart. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beeping of monitors. Rachel sat beside her daughter Emily's bed, holding her small hand. The doctors had delivered the news that morning. Emily's condition was terminal. No treatment options remained. At 8 years old, Emily looked tiny against the white hospital sheets. Her once vibrant red hair lay limp on the pillow, her face pale and drawn from months of illness. Rachel hadn't left her side in 3 days, watching helplessly as her daughter grew weaker. The night shift nurse had just finished her rounds when Rachel noticed a change in the air. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly, and a familiar presence filled the room. She turned to find Daniel standing in the doorway, still 12 years old, still wearing that determined expression she knew so well. "No," Rachel whispered, rising from her chair. "Daniel, you can't. You've already used your 100 healings this year," the entity said. "I know what it said," Daniel interrupted softly, moving to Emily's bedside. He looked down at his niece, whom he'd watched over from afar since her birth. "But this is different. This is family." Rachel stepped between them, her voice breaking. "The entity told you there would be consequences if you broke the rules. I can't let you risk it." Daniel's young face held an ancient wisdom as he met his sister's eyes. "I've spent 15 years healing other people's children. Let me heal yours." Emily stirred in her sleep, her breathing labored. The monitors showed her vital signs growing weaker. Rachel felt torn between her role as a sister and a mother, knowing what Daniel's gift might cost him. "Some prices are worth paying," Daniel whispered, gently moving past Rachel. He placed his small hand on Emily's forehead, and a soft glow began to emanate from his fingers. "Please," Rachel begged, tears streaming down her face. "There has to be another way." But Daniel had already begun. The glow spread from his hands, enveloping Emily in gentle light. The room filled with warmth, and the monitor's beeping grew stronger, more regular. Suddenly, Daniel gasped in pain. The light flickered, and he gripped the bed rail to steady himself. "The entity knows," he said through clenched teeth. "It's trying to stop me." Rachel reached for him, but he shook his head. "Don't interrupt it. I have to finish." The light grew brighter, and Daniel's face contorted with effort. Emily's color began to improve, her breathing eased, but Daniel's form seemed to flicker like a candle in the wind. "Daniel, stop," Rachel pleaded, seeing her brother's pain. "You're hurting yourself." "Almost done." Daniel's voice was strained. The light pulsed once more, then faded. Emily's eyes fluttered open, clear and bright for the first time in months. "Mommy." Emily's voice was stronger than it had been in weeks. "I feel better." Rachel rushed to her daughter's side, checking her temperature, her pulse. Everything seemed normal. When she turned back to thank Daniel, she froze. Her brother stood in the shadows, but something had changed. His form seemed less solid, more like a memory than a person. "The entity is calling me," he said quietly. "Breaking the rules has consequences." "What's happening to you?" Rachel reached for him, but her hand passed through his arm like mist. "I chose this." Daniel smiled, though his image continued to fade. "I chose Emily, just like I chose all those other children. Love is always worth the price." Emily sat up in bed, looking at the fading boy with wonder. "Are you my uncle, Daniel? Mom told me about you." Daniel moved closer, his form growing fainter by the second. "Yes, I am. Take care of your mom for me, okay? She worries too much." Rachel couldn't speak through her tears as she watched her brother's form dissolve like morning dew. His last words hung in the air. "I don't regret anything, Rachel. Love is the greatest healing of all." Then he was gone. The room felt emptier, colder, but Emily's restored health was proof he had been there. Rachel held her daughter close, feeling both profound gratitude and deep loss. The night nurse rushed in, alerted by the changes in Emily's vital signs. She stopped short, staring at the healthy child sitting up in bed. "This is impossible," she muttered, checking the monitors. "I need to call the doctor." As medical staff flooded the room, amazed by Emily's miraculous recovery, Rachel stood at the window, looking out at the night sky. Somewhere out there, her brother was facing the consequences of his choice. He had given up not just his chance to grow up, but perhaps his very existence, to save his niece. Emily's voice broke through her thoughts. "Mom, that boy, Uncle Daniel, he looked just like in the picture you keep in your wallet." Rachel turned back to her daughter, seeing Daniel's same determination reflected in Emily's eyes. "Yes, sweetheart. He's been helping children for a very long time." "Will we see him again?" Emily asked. Rachel touched the window glass, cool against her fingers. "I don't know, honey, but he'll always be with us, in every child's laugh, in every miracle of healing." Outside, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter, as if reflecting the light of a boy who had given everything for love. Rachel silently thanked her brother, knowing that some sacrifices, as Daniel had said, were worth any price. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Daniel's Light Foundation, where Rachel sat at her desk reviewing applications for medical assistance. 10 years had passed since that night in the hospital when Daniel sacrificed himself to save Emily. The foundation, now the largest children's medical charity in the state, helped hundreds of families each year. Emily, now 18 and preparing for medical school, worked part-time at the foundation's front desk. She had her uncle's determination and his passion for healing others. Though she didn't remember much from the night of her recovery, she carried Daniel's spirit in everything she did. Rachel opened her drawer and pulled out a worn envelope. The letter inside, found on her doorstep 5 years ago, was written in Daniel's familiar handwriting. Dear Rachel, the entity didn't take me away that night. It transformed me. I became something different, something more than human. I now exist between moments, in the spaces between light and shadow. My purpose has become my essence. I'm at peace with this. Don't worry about me. Every child I heal brings me joy. And knowing you and Emily are safe makes everything worthwhile. Keep helping others in your own way. You'll see signs of me now and then. Love always, Daniel. The foundation's walls were lined with photos of children who had received help, medical treatments funded, specialists consulted, families supported through difficult times. But mixed among these were occasional stories of miraculous recoveries, unexplained healings that happened in the night. Rachel walked through the foundation's halls, passing volunteers and staff members busy with their daily work. They all knew Daniel's story. It had become a symbol of hope, inspiring others to help however they could. The latest case files on her desk included reports from various hospitals describing mysterious occurrences. A young boy with terminal cancer suddenly recovered. A girl with a rare genetic condition inexplicably healed. Each case had a familiar pattern. They happened at night, and security cameras often showed strange light under doorways. Emily entered the office, carrying a stack of papers. Mom, did you see the news from Memorial Hospital? Another miracle last night. The nurses said they saw a glowing figure in the children's ward. Rachel smiled, remembering all the similar reports over the years. Some nights, walking the hospital corridors during her foundation work, she caught glimpses of a familiar silhouette, a small figure with gentle hands, moving from room to room, leaking hope in his wake. Your uncle's still out there, Rachel said softly. He found a way to keep his promise, even after everything. The foundation had grown beyond Rachel's wildest dreams. What started as a small charity in Daniel's memory had become a beacon of hope for families facing medical crisis. They provided financial assistance, coordinated with hospitals, and maintained a network of supporters across the country. Late at night, when the foundation offices were quiet, Rachel would sometimes sit by the window, watching the city lights. She thought about her brother, eternally 12 yet ancient in wisdom, moving through the world unseen but ever present. The photos on her desk showed Emily's graduation, her acceptance to medical school, her volunteer work at children's hospitals. In each image, there was sometimes a curious light in the background, a familiar glow that Rachel had come to recognize.